Welcome to Bigger Than the Game with Deremy and Jose. I'm Deremy Dove. I'm joined by the man himself, the legend,
What's
Mr. Jose Ruiz. What's going on, man?
going on, Deremy, man? It's good to see you, man. As always, good to be on the show. As
It
always.
is. It is. It's good to. This is our first recording. I know we've put out episodes, but our first recording in 2023. So we're going on to year 3 for Bigger Than the Game.
Yeah, man. This week, yeah, it's exciting news, and again, it's been fun. I know we've had a few things going on. You know what I'm saying? Like throughout the 3 years, but definitely, it's recent. Like end of 2022 and into 2023. But it looks like we're rolling again, and definitely excited. NFL championship weekend coming up. Some great games, man. And it's all good. NFL
Yeah,
football is hot right now.
and that's true, man. And it's Championship Sunday, this weekend, and it's such a fun time. And I do think it's just like there's something about it. It's like those conference title games, those two Titan teams kind
Yeah,
of battling it out and trying to see like who's going to the big dance. And it had both of us thinking about, doing a great championship game. And there's so many to do.
yeah,
It's hard to pick. There's a lot of them. But you know, we're coming up on around 10 years since the Legion of Boom kind of really first laid down their track and kind of shook the NFL up. And they gave us great players, great personalities, great moments, great games, but also a great rivalry. And Jose, I want to let you talk about it because this is one, like when we talked about it, you
yeah,
lit up this Seahawk 49er rivalry.
yeah. I loved it, and I was all about it, and yeah, and then that's what we're going to do. We're looking at 49ers Seahawks between 2011 2014, let's just say, and because if you're a newer generation to watching football like this, these two were not division rivals for 30, 40 years. Like we're looking at like Eagles, Cowboys, Packers, Bears, like things like that. Like, what I'm saying? Like this is more of like a newer like rival. It was like early 2000s when Seattle came over from the AFC West to the NFC West, and then they're playing 49ers, Rams, et cetera, et cetera. And but in this time, man, like this was probably, I looked at it like almost like throwback football, right? Because at this time you got Peyton Manning in Denver, doing everything they were doing there, and Brady and Breeze, and you had all these quarterbacks putting up all these crazy numbers, and then you had these two teams who were built very, very similar. We'll get into all that, but they predominantly built on defense, physical defense. They would get flying to the ball, and we hear all those cliches with a lot of coaches, but these two teams definitely had that. And you talked about personalities there, me. Both of these teams had that, not only as players but coaches as well. They had tremendous Hall of Fame talent on both of these teams. So it was just when these two teams played each other, it just went up a notch. And it was like both these two defenses were trying to outdo each other, and it was just beautiful football to watch, physical football. Man, it was just a fun time to watch these two teams play.
And we're looking at that rivalry, like about 2011 to 2014, but we're highlighting the
Right.
biggest game of it, that 2013 NFC Championship game. And Jose, I guess for me, would you say since 2010, has this been the best rivalry in football, in your opinion?
Since 2010, yes. I know Steelers, Ravens, we were talking about earlier before we jumped on, has been pretty good. But at this point, like that's starting to die down a little bit. Not die down, because I know those two fan bases really don't get along. But these two teams, I mean, when we're again, we'll get into this, but in this stretch, like these are the two teams that were representing the NFC for a couple of years in a row there. So I would say 100% yes.
No, I think it's interesting because I won't. Colts, people say, I've seen people say, like, oh, Broncos, Patriots in this time. And I feel like, no, like that
Yeah.
was Manning Brady continued. But when I think of the rival, like Colts, Patriots was a rival. That's
Yes.
the rivalry of, to me, of since 2000 was those Patriots, Broncos was like, oh, it's Brady and Manning. But those teams didn't really have it like that.
No.
Um, Steelers Ravens was great in the 2000s. It kind of did go away for a little bit in the start of the 2010s,
Right.
because it kind of went opposite of this in a way. Like
Yeah.
the Steelers started being more pass happy and more explosive offense than that typical ground and pound tough Steeler defense kind of a team. So I really do think that at this era and since 2010, the most exciting rivalry, it really has been these two teams.
Yeah, and it was great football. Like, like you can have two teams that don't like each other, but they have to play well. And these two teams were playing extremely well in this little era that we're going to talk about. And especially in 2013, the Seahawks were, probably second best team regular season wise. When, you look at Denver as well, Denver had a lights out season. But, again, these two teams represented the NFC in the Super Bowl. The 49ers went the previous year. The Seahawks went in 2013. So these two teams were the top of the class when it came to the NFC. And again, like we look at how they were doing it, right? You talked about like the ground and pound, like, both these teams have physical, running games, pretty good offensive lines, good running backs, right? You got Frank Gore, Marshawn Lynch, probably two Hall of Fame running backs.
Yeah.
You had two quarterbacks who were very similar in Russell Wilson and again, Colin Kaepernick, who would, we could put them on the move. They could make some throws, but predominantly they were on the run, but again, like what I always think about these two teams is what they did defensively. And, we have one team who had the great nickname and all the fanfare and all the loud personalities, but we're definitely going to get into the other team and what they had on that defense, which was just as good.
No, and it's interesting to look at because I bet people won't think about it. From 2011, 2012, 2013, the Niners went to 3 straight championship games.
Yep.
A Super Bowl appearance. They lost 2012, that Super Bowl, the Ravens with the lights going out, and they made that comeback but couldn't finish it. Some may say the league was fixing that. We heard some Ravens fans and Ravens players saying that. But they couldn't get it done in that Super Bowl. But 3 straight title game appearances, that's an impressive run that I think people kind of overlook, Jose, about those Niners in the early 2010s.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll be honest, like I forgot about that, even coming into doing this show. And I was like, man, like, they were there. They were close. And even in that game, you talked about that comeback. We all know what happened. They were on like a 6-7 yard line and they couldn't punch it in, right? So they were very, very close to winning the Super Bowl. And, but then it comes the Seattle team with all the talent with Pete Carroll, and then they kind of pull one out, in 2013. But in historic fashion at that, you know what I'm saying? Like, and they just put a pounding on that Denver Broncos team. And again, like for me, it reminded me that no matter how great these offenses are, if you have a great defense, you got a good shot. And again, these two teams were the epitome of that because again, like it's not like these quarterbacks were putting up tremendous numbers. They were putting up good numbers, but they weren't putting up Peyton Manning, Drew Brees numbers at this time, at this era. Eventually Russell Wilson does do that stuff, but in this year, they had pretty good seasons. But again, you're looking at Frank Gore, Marshawn Lynch running the ball between the tackles. Even if you look at that 49ers offense as a whole, like, they had 2 really solid receivers. Anquan Bolden was one of my favorite receivers. Great player, very underrated player. You got Crabtree, who was a decent player. You got Vernon Davis is a really good tight end. So even that offense didn't have like that big playability. It was just like they were just going to get you by chunks and chunks and chunks and not turn the ball over and not put that defense in a bad position. And they did that extremely well.
Yeah, and it's fun. We always say bigger than the game with Deremy and Jose connect the past to the present. You look at currently, the Niners are playing in the championship game coming up this weekend. It's their 3rd championship game appearance in 4 years.
Right. And
they're built so similar.
Yeah.
And they're also kind of even the same way where you had Trent, Baalke as the GM, the hotshot GM, and Jim Harbaugh was the hotshot coach. You look at it now, John Lynch, that GM, and Kyle Shanahan, that coach. It's very eerie, like, how these teams are kind of similar. You mentioned Vernon Davis, George Kittle. It's just kind of funny. Like, Debo Samuel is a different kind of beast than what, and Bolden, I loved him too. He was older at this point.
Right.
Yeah. It wasn't young. Young Anquan would have been a much different story.
Yeah, he was putting up 1,400 yard seasons
every
season, So.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but they're these hard hitting defenses. It's I take that defense in the early 2010s over
Oh
this
yes.
defense now, but still a very physical, hard hitting. So it's similar. How these. It's kind of funny a decade later how these teams are built, and wondering, looking at it now, if the Niners organization learned from what happened earlier in 2010s to kind of get over the hump. Now we'll see, but
I mean, we shall see. You know what I'm saying? And the thing is, like, you're exactly right. These teams are very, very similar. And what that tells me, this philosophy works. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you can run the ball, have really good offensive line play, which, the 49ers did in this era for sure, with two Pro Bowlers in 2013, and they have a really solid offensive line as of today with Trent Williams. And, these are all time great anyway. But, solid running game, which they have, good wide receiver play, and again, that tight end is always the quarterback's best friend. And they had two very versatile tight ends. It works. You know what I'm saying? And if you have good defense, you don't turn the ball over, like you're going to be in a lot of games. And if you can pull out some of these games, then you're going to have a really good season. And on the flip side, right, you look at a Seattle Seahawks team at this era, and same thing, right? Like they have the young quarterback Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson. I think this is like it was his coming out year in 2013, and you had the running game with Marshawn Lynch. Now, this offensive line with Max Unger was super. He was really good as really good Pro Bowl center, but they were about average as an offensive line. But you look at these wide receivers, who I really always liked. Doug Baldwin was always my sneaky fantasy football wide receiver because he would get you 8 or 9 touchdowns a year. He'll have a couple good games, and you could just always stash him in the bench. But all the wide receivers were very similar. Right, they were smaller, real quick guys. They can get in and out of their breaks and catch a slant, and take it to the house. You had Baldwin, Golden Tate, Jermaine Kearse, all very very similar wide receivers. And what they did was they helped Russell Wilson when he was running around scrambling. They were getting open. You know what I'm saying? Then later on they draft Tyler Lockett, things like that. It was just that same wide receiver where it's just smaller, quicker guys who can get open when Russell's running around, scrambling, and can make catches. And they definitely had that. I think this Seattle offense was a little more explosive than the 49ers offense at this time. But, again, not similar offenses, but I love the philosophy that the Seahawks have with that.
that's interesting. I probably would, looking back, I agree, but in the moment, I probably would have said, I feel like San Fran was a little bit more explosive. And the only reason why is because, the Seahawks went after they got Percy Harvin.
Yeah.
And Percy Harvin was an explosive player, but he never really injury prone, right. Never panned out in Seattle. He had a year or two that was good in Minnesota, but never really clicked in Seattle for him. And it was kind of that's what was missing. Doug Baldwin, to me, did become a really good receiver and better than what I thought he would be, honestly.
Absolutely, yeah.
But I didn't – and if I'm going back to what I was thinking in 2013, I didn't see it in him as that. I felt like Russell didn't have that guy he could count on.
Right.
But also, they weren't looking for Russell to do that. Russell needed just to make some plays to stay alive. Like you said, the big difference – well, there's two – but the obvious difference to me then and now was San Fran had a much better O-line than what Seattle did. And you're right. Max Unger was a really good center, all-pro type of center. Russell Okung, got drafted in 2010, was an okay tackle, but didn't really hit for being a number 6 overall pick. Yeah. They didn't have that O-line, which is even more impressive for me for what Marshawn Lynch was doing, as a running back for this Seahawk team. But I found it interesting because I feel like Baldwin, when you look at it now, it's Baldwin emerged. He was the guy. People who I think who don't remember will be oh, he must have been having monster stats, but he wasn't that guy quite yet. And Russell wasn't that guy as far as a thrower quite yet back in 2013.
Yeah, their offense was predicated on the running game, play action pass, and a lot of broken plays. Russ running around, and even in this 2013 game, championship game, they were one of their biggest plays is Russell running around, literally scrambling for 2 minutes, and then Doug Baldwin breaks free and Russell hits him with a beautiful bomb right over the middle, and they didn't score, but it was a big play, especially when you talk about what defense they were doing it to. So Yeah, I just, that's why for me, like what I can remember going back, it's like that offense seemed more explosive because again, there was so many of those like Russell scrambling and making a move, and then Baldwin like getting open for like a 20-yard pass right over the middle, and creating a little something. But Golden Tate breaking a couple tackles and making another play there. So, but if you look at it, if you would have asked me in 2013, I'm looking at Anquan Bolden and Michael Crabtree, who I thought was going to be a beast coming out of Texas Tech, but I would have picked Crabtree, Bolden over the wide receiver crew that Seattle had for sure.
And for me, that Vernon Davis factor was huge.
Right. Yep.
For San Fran as well. And also, when Kaepernick came in, Harbaugh made the gutsy call. A guy, Alex Smith, got him to the championship game in 2011, but honestly was to me the reason why.
Yeah.
The reason why they should have won that game.
Yep.
And he's the reason why. I know people want to blame Kyle Williams and the fumbles, and that didn't help. But that Niner defense did all you could. The way they smacked around Eli Manning and were hitting him and really taking it to him. But you had Alex Smith, who, and I like him. I respect Alex Smith. He turned his career around, but he just couldn't get him over the hump. And if you had a quarterback who could, I think Eli doesn't have 2 rings. I'll be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
And Eli played heroically in that game, but the Niners defense was smacking. They just could not get anything going. So the next year was controversial when they still have a really good record. They're still in first. And then he goes with Colin Kaepernick. And that was the thing for that 12-13 run. Kaepernick's putting up monster, numbers. Yeah. And a lot of it
some
is
historic stuff too,
right? It's rushing, but it's also he's getting some passing numbers too as well, like in some of these games. So Kaepernick for that year and a half run was whoa, he was just coming on strong, and you're thinking, what could this guy do later on?
Yeah, he was very. I'm being careful with this. Very Randall-esque, you know what I mean? Randall Cunningham-esque, and it's not. He was nowhere near Randall's talent, but just the way they played with the long strides, and Kaepernick had a really strong arm. Now, he wasn't as accurate as maybe Alex Smith for sure, but he can get it down the field, and that's what they were missing. Right. Alex Smith was the check down king, I used to call him, and it was just here and there, 5 yards here. It's hard to play offense like that. You know what I mean? That every drive has to be 12, 13 plays, eating up clock. It's just hard to sustain that. You need an explosive play from time to time, and Kaepernick not only gave you that in the air, right, with a strong arm, but he also gave you that, as we saw for those couple of years, on the ground with his legs. And he was dynamic runner at the quarterback position. And, those long strides, man, like that. I'm just thinking that playoff game, what was it, Green Bay, he had 182 yards or something like that, crazy. And he took over that game. So, we're not going to get into all the Kaepernick stuff and all that, but for me, that I used to laugh at was when people say he was a scrub, and he was not a scrub for sure. Right,
and that's where, like you said, not trying to get into that, but it is that's why it's an obvious blackball,
right?
Because you see what he did, and it's really 32 quarterbacks were better than him, and then all the backups were better. Come on now, it was obvious, but. That right there, what you said, though, to me was the difference with these two teams.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the fact that you're right. You can win in the NFL in the regular season with that dink and dunk stuff, but you have to be able to push it down the field, especially in you're playing against better competition, which we all know you are in the playoffs. So in the playoffs, you're not going to win when they know what you're doing, and you're not playing scrubs once you get to January and February. So you have to be able to do that, and that's the thing right there. The difference with these two teams comes down to the quarterbacks, and as dominant as Colin was, Russell. And it's funny because I think we throw out game manager a lot to people when they're not that quarterback who's leading the charge and throwing for 450 and 4 touchdowns, and you lean on the run game more. Oh, he's a game manager, and it's that's a knock. I feel that's that's not fair.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because was Russell the guy he became later on at this point? No, it's his second year, but he showed. And I know looking in 2023, a lot of people are burying Russell right now, and rightfully so in a lot of cases. Like, I'm not saying he didn't bring some of it on himself, but we got to remember, yes, Marshawn, it was the defense and Marshawn, but the difference between these two teams, the biggest one, was that Russell knew how to he had that it factor. He had that clutch ability to where he didn't turn over, but he knew how to keep a play alive and hit a Doug Baldwin, a Golden Tate, Jermaine Kearse down the field to extend the drive and keep it going. And he had that it clutch factor more than a Colin Kaepernick did. And that was such a huge difference to me between these guys, especially going back and rewatching it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, you can see what happened afterwards too. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, Seattle went on a crazy run against the 49ers, and that was the same thing I was thinking, Deremy. It's like it was the development of the quarterback that, you know, for each team, like if you look at it from both sides, like that's like Seattle won 10 in a row against the 49ers. It became not a rival, right? But that was because the evolution of Wilson compared to like what happened with Kaepernick, plus a bunch of other stuff I wanted to get into anyway with some of the 49ers players. But I agree that was the difference. And it was like Russ can make a couple of those plays that Kaepernick may miss, you know, like with the throw or something like that, like on the run. And it just, Russell was a lot more accurate, excuse me. And that put Seattle, it was like a notch above the 49ers. Sure.
Right. And that's where I think I felt like it was kind of like knocked down back then. And I feel like it's overlooked now, but we got to give Russell, I think, more credit than what he got for that 2012 to 2014 run by Seattle. Obviously, Legion of Boom, and we're going to talk about them in detail. Historic defense, great defense. They should be talked about first. No doubt about it. But Russell Wilson, if he's not doing what he's doing, I don't know if they're getting over the hump over these Niners and getting to the Super Bowl, or the next year getting over that hump against the Packers in the championship game and getting to the Super Bowl. He was important. You want that game manager label on him? That's to me is a cheap shot because he did a lot of stuff. He was clutch to help get them over the hump.
Yeah, he definitely won a lot of games for them for sure. And even if you look at his season, I mean, he threw for 33, 57, 26 touchdowns, 9 interceptions, and the 9 interceptions is what you want. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Like, you don't want him to put the ball, you know what I mean, put that defense in a rough spot. Because, again, like, with both of these teams, but especially the Seattle team, like, you're not going 80 yards against this team very often and putting up points. So, you know, he's doing that in the air. He also rushes for 539 yards and a touchdown. So, you know, he's almost putting up almost 4,000 total yards. So, to me, that's a successful season at the quarterback position, especially when you have a running game behind you like that and that defense on the other side.
No, absolutely. And we had mentioned this when we had Dr. John as a guest on our 2011 redraft episode. You know, check the archives.
Check them.
But, you know, Jose, looking at the way both these teams were built, but really especially the Seahawks, and, you know, that John Snyder, Pete Carroll, you know, combo that they've had, you know, ever since.
Great combination there, man.
It's been a great combo and a great draft combination.
Yeah.
And we can look at it, the steals that they had in 2010, getting, you know, Earl Thomas in the first round.
Who I wanted the Eagles to draft so bad.
Yeah.
But it worked out. It
did. The Eagles got Brandon Graham.
Right.
You know, who, you know, was clutch. Hey, that strip sack in the Super Bowl. So, like, for a long time, it wasn't looking like it was good.
No, it was not.
It wasn't.
Especially like those first 3 years. Ugh.
Yeah, it was like, man, we blew it. But I could say we did not blow it. Like, is he Earl Thomas?
Credit to him.
Yeah, he's not Earl Thomas, but Brandon Graham's had a heck of a career, so give him credit. But they get Cam Chancellor in the 5th in 2010.
Right.
I mean, and I think just people – it's so weird because the Legion of Boom is not forgotten. They're still talked about. They're still everywhere. Like, not just because Russell's playing and Pete's still coaching, but just the names are just.
Richard Sherman's now in the media. That's going to help keep it alive for sure.
Yeah, Marshawn's is an icon.
Whatever he's doing, yeah.
You know, so like they're not forgotten. But I feel like the impact that Cam Chancellor had, I felt like he was honestly underrated when he was playing because and not due to, I think due to he's such a big hitter that people saw the big hits, but just the impact that he had over that field. The safeties to me were the secret weapons of the Legion of Boom.
Yep.
Earl Thomas and Cam Chan, those were the guys like you feared of the secondary, in my opinion. But it's just, Jose, how impactful and how great Cam Chancellor was in this era.
Yeah, and he was a freak of nature, because you don't look at that safety position and, you get big hitters and things like that, but he was not only that, he was big as hell. He was built like a linebacker, you know what I'm saying? Like, and to have that size, that strength, but the ability to still cover and play deep, and it was just, it wasn't even fair, you know what I'm saying? Like, because again, like now you have Chancellor and you have Earl Thomas. So Earl Thomas can do everything else, right? Like Earl Thomas was playing deep. He was picking off passes and things like that. He had 5 interceptions in 2013. But, Chancellor had 3, right? But you're playing Chancellor more closer to the line of scrimmage. So not only now, you have like an extra linebacker in the box, and he's definitely helping out against the run. But he was also a smart player, man. Like it was just that tandem was an amazing, amazing tandem. Because, again, if you look at the cornerback position now, you got Richard Sherman, who is probably going to be in the Hall of Fame. But this year you got Brandon Browner, on the other side. And the safety position, to me, those two safeties are much better than the two corners. You know what I'm saying? Like, and they definitely made Richard Sherman's and Browner's careers and seasons a lot easier having them two guys roaming that middle.
No, and I agree. And I think this might be a hot take for some. I don't know. To me, the lock of the 4 of them is for Hall of Fame is Earl Thomas.
Okay.
The number 2 guy to me should be Cam Chancellor. We're talking about like where we really talk about it. Richard Sherman, not a Hall of Famer. I think he will get it. Like you said, he has the media. He was a known voice. This game that we're going to get into really helped propel him into people's memory. But Richard Sherman, to me, should not be in the Hall of Fame. And I look at Cam Chancellor, not just because he was more important, but just his career and what he did. I would rather have a discussion, if I was a Hall of Fame voter, about Cam Chancellor than I would about Richard Sherman, in my opinion.
That is a hot take because I disagree with that. Like, and I love Chancellor. Deremy, I'm all about the DBs, in particular the safety position. I love safeties, man. And I think if his career was longer, it's a slam dunk. You know what I mean? Like Cam Chancellor's in the Hall of Fame, but I just think I don't know. I wouldn't be mad if he gets in the Hall of Fame for sure. Like I think.
I'm not calling him a Hall of Famer. I think he should get more like, consideration.
Your pecking order is
right.
Safeties, Sherman. Got you.
Right. I think Earl Thomas is the number 1 guy of them.
Yeah.
And like to get it, and I think Cam Chancellor should be more considered. I think Richard Sherman, I don't ever remember him being the number 1 cornerback in the game. Was he one of the best for a few years? Yeah, I never said that's the best corner. And if you look at his run of being up there, it's a very short run. And to me, I think that's one of the big things the Hall of Fame is getting wrong now, which is if you have a short run, it could be a great run, but it's short. To me, it's got to be a transcendent, it changed the game type of run to make up for it. Gale Sayers, you can look at him as a running back, and you can say, before Gale, after Gale. He was a transcendent kind of running back. So for 6 years, that's all he played. But we never seen anything like that before. And he changed how we saw running backs play. He gets it. Terrell Davis, who I loved, should not be in the Hall of Fame.
No.
And that's the thing. I think guys now, we are so stat driven. And it's kind of hurts it where now it's like, because he had a few All-Pros. I'm not taking that away from him, but he had a few All-Pros and he made the All-Decade team. That's going to put Richard Sherman in. And it's like, you got to look at it. He really had like a 3-year run, in my opinion. He didn't play 10 years is great, but like the last bit of it, he was a talker. He was not a shutdown corner.
No.
And I just look at it like, Ty Law got in the Hall of Fame, and I don't know if I agree. And I love, he's a Michigan guy.
I was about to say that might be your guy, yeah. So,
but I think it's like I don't look at Ty Law as a Hall of Famer, And then I don't know if I would put Richard Sherman over a Ty Law, to be quite honest with you. So it's like, overall for a career body of
Right.
work, I don't think I would.
That's actually a good comparison, though. Both. Ty Law. I think what helped Ty Law is like the postseason stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like the big moments in the postseason. Sherman had a couple of them, in particular 2013 championship game. But I would go with Ty Law over Richard Sherman.
Right. And I don't know if Ty Law was a lock Hall of Famer to me.
Right.
Like, he's kind of like iffy, and I loved him. And I thought he was like underrated as a player, but like Hall of Famer, I don't know.
Yeah.
Richard Sherman, to me, I feel like will get in, and that's a problem because he didn't have that as long as a run if people really look at it, and it definitely was not transcendent type of football. He's on a transcendent type of defense, but he himself was not transcendent type of football. So that's why I want to bring up Chancellor, because to me, like you said it, that really helped out a Brandon Browner, Sherman, Maxwell later on.
Yeah.
Like, especially Maxwell. But like that really,
yeah, we know that.
Yeah, Byron needed more help. Brandon Browner was
He's a solid player. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot off the field, but was solid.
Yeah. Yeah, he went to New England and played well too. So he was a physical corner, and that's the thing with this whole defensive backfield, man. Like, they were all physical players. Richard Sherman was physical. He wasn't like the fastest guy out there. He was more of like a, bump you up in the line of scrimmage, things like that. And we all know what these two safeties were bringing to the table. Like, you had to keep your head on the swivel, and that's very cliche-ish, but with both of these defenses and the safeties, you had to make sure you knew where they were at. And then you talked about Earl Thomas a little bit. Man, he was a great player, man. Like, such a great player and such a great leader, and he was just that all around. He was the best player, but he was just the all around guy. Like, what I'm saying, he can cover, he can play the line of scrimmage, he can play the run. They were shutting down tight ends. Really shut down Gronk. It was just they were. I remember Chancellor put Gronk out. Like, what I mean? It was just they were just nasty, man. And again, like, that's why I love this defense so much. And like, just watching them, I love both of these defenses, but
right.
that Legion of Boom, man, had me for a minute there. Like, what I'm saying? Because again, I love the DB play, and they did it as good as a lot of defenses of all time.
Right, and that the DB and to give it, and hey, Brandon Browner, like you said, not the career that Sherman had, but I'll say this, maybe another hot take, Jose. 2023, I'm coming. Brandon Browner was the cornerback with Richard Sherman tandem for this 2013 Seahawks World Champs.
Let me take a sip, man.
Brandon Browner goes to the Patriots. Him and Revis, that combo, get the Patriots over the hump, stop that 10-year gap, winning the championship.
I forgot
Bill Belichick said the reason what put them over the edge was that corner combo of Revis and Browner. Two physical guys, they will go anywhere on the field and lock a guy down.
Say it, Deremy.
I do not believe if you put Richard Sherman on the Patriots that following year, we're going to say the same thing.
So what you're saying to me and all the listeners, you think Browner was a better player than Sherman?
I'm saying Richard Sherman. Not going to say that. Richard Sherman had a better career. I'm going to say Richard Sherman is a highly overrated player. And I think it is borderline crazy that we're talking about him and people are saying he's a lock Hall of Famer. And you read articles and people talk about him as one of the great cornerbacks of all time. And you'll go on place, but they'll say it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll be honest. You love Eric Allen. Is it a slam dunk that Richard Sherman's better than Eric Allen?
No, absolutely not. We can get into that conversation if you want to, but
no. I'm just saying, right? So to me, and Eric Allen's still waiting for the Hall of Fame. So the fact that it's almost like a lock, and I don't care if it's not first ballot or anything. I don't think he should be remembered for this defense. He had a very good career. Borderline, you say great career. A Hall of Fame career? Absolutely not. So that's what I just say.
I think a lot of people are going to agree with you. I think, oh man, it's tough. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think he'll get in. I definitely do. And I know you said this. I know you said that too. But I just I think him being the voice of this defense, he wasn't the best player, but him being the voice of it and him being so outspoken and we talked about it when we did the redraft, like that, him being in the media is going to keep his name out there. He's going to get in. You know what I'm saying? Like, but yeah, I agree. And so what Deremy's saying, right? You out of these DBs, he's number 4. That's what you're saying.
And not for a career in 2013, 2014, for those couple years, yes. For a career, no. He had a better career than Brandon Browner did. And a lot of that's Brandon Browner's own fault and his off-the-field stuff.
Yeah.
Brandon Browner was a very good player.
He was.
But in this, for these couple of years, yeah, he's number 4 to me.
See,
absolutely.
And you talked about Chancellor being so underrated, right? And to me, it was Browner who was the most underrated out of all of these guys. Because at least Chancellor, he made the Pro Bowl. He was an All-Pro. Browner, he did not get his due. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then he goes to the Patriots, and who gets his due? Revis gets, Revis gets a lot of that credit. And I remember Bill Belichick saying that. I saw the interview when he said that, and I was surprised by that. And I was like, man, like Browner is that good of a player that he made that big of a difference. You know what I'm saying? And to an all-time great defensive coach who has coached great defensive backs, and it's just obviously I'm going to take his word over a lot of other people. But to me, it was always Browner. Browner was the most underrated out of these 4 because I felt like if he would have went anywhere else and been the main guy, he would have been perfectly fine.
Now, I do. The only reason why I say that is Brandon Browner's done a lot of bad stuff. Let me be real, off the field. Yeah. So part of me is like, I don't know if that's what's clouding it because Brandon Browner's forgotten.
Yeah.
And now people want to put like Byron Maxwell. The Legion of Boom's not Byron Maxwell. Let's be real. No. But Brandon Browner's done such off the field stuff. So part of me is like, I don't know if the underratedness is how much that affects it nowadays. Where like if he had a clean record, I would totally be like, and I still feel like you're right, but I feel like a lot of it now people want to like forget Brandon Browner existed almost like I should go under the rug.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I'm like, it makes me kind of stop a little bit and be like, is it totally just he's overlooked, or is it like people just don't want to bring him up? But I will say that, and I'm not going to say that I think if Richard Sherman gets in, he'll be the Eli Manning of defensive Hall of Famers. I'm not going to say that, Jose. I'm thinking it, I'm feeling it, but
that's a tough one there.
That's the Eli Manning. Eli's going to get into the Hall of Fame, and he shouldn't be in. That's the offense of like what Richard Sherman is that for me on the defense. It's like, what are we doing, fellas? When we're doing that, like, come on now. So
yeah, the Hall of Fame is definitely in most sports has definitely taken a step back.
Slipped.
Yeah, taking a step back for sure. So this is the strength of the Seattle defense. I wanted to talk to you, Deremy, about the strength of this 49ers defense, right? And a lot of people when they think of this 49ers defense, they immediately go to this linebacker core, right? And I don't blame them. Because sheesh, man, like these guys, if they would have had a longer run and then injuries and we all know Patrick Willis, him retiring early, and we all know what Alden Smith would happen. And even in this season, he was taking a step back already. But if you look at this linebacker core, the 49ers, Deremy had, like that they had, you got Ma Brooks, who was a Pro Bowler this season. You got Navarro Bowman, who was a Pro Bowler, All-Pro, All-World.
First team All-Pro.
Yeah, All-World. He was amazing. You got Patrick Willis, Pro Bowler, right? That's the name that everybody remembers. And then you got Alden Smith, who was a sack machine. Not this season, 2012 season, he had 19 and a half sacks. But he came out, everybody thought that, he was a Hall of Fame player in the waiting, you know what I'm saying? And then he had his off-the-field issues 100% documented. But talk to me about this linebacker core, Deremy. Like, how great were they, man?
And also, they were a benefactor, like Justin Smith up front.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Eating up space, like, so I just want to point him out. Like,
he was a quiet, one of the best defensive linemen in the league at this time. Maybe
absolutely. Absolutely. And he was huge. It goes, we can do a lot of comparisons where even what we just said, at this point, Brandon Browner is better than Richard Sherman, in my opinion. Now, Richard Sherman had a career. At this point, I look at this linebacking core. Patrick Willis, to me, is the Hall of Fame type guy. Like, I think he should be in the Hall of Fame, what Patrick Willis did.
Again, like another short career that we were talking about, but he was at a very high level throughout the career.
Right. He never, really dipped.
No.
And it was much longer run than Richard Sherman, just to say. But,
leave Richard Sherman alone, man. Like,
I cannot. Dude bothers me. And this game is what made him a lot of money, let's be real.
Yeah.
But at this point, Patrick Willis is not the linebacker. To me, Navarro Bowman is the best linebacker on this team. And that says something because Patrick Willis is still playing elite level football, but Navarro Bowman, and in this game, he showed it. Is just dominant and just like a man, and quiet, but just like a man's man. And I'll be honest, I've never seen anyone give Marshawn Lynch some trouble the way you watch this game. Navarro Bowman's laying the wood out there, and part of me wonders how this game ends if Navarro Bowman doesn't get hurt. And on an amazing play where his ACL gets torn, he gets a fumble recovery, holds on to the ball while he's down, and the refs still don't give it to him.
Call. Yep.
And they wind up the Niners, pretty much said their own version of ball don't lie in this game. And the next play, they on the goal line, 1 yard, which will be key, 1 yard for Marshawn Lynch. Yep. They hit him, call a fumble, and get the ball back. That's how great this Niners D was.
Yeah.
There's a few defenses in history, and the Niners didn't win, so they're not going to the Super Bowl, so they won't get called this. But there's a few defenses in history who have that kind of ability where they're we're going to take this ball away right now.
Yeah.
And they go out there and do it. Both these defenses had it, and they're both in that elite level class, in my opinion, in NFL history.
Yeah, I agree 100%, and that's what made these games so great, because I felt like these two defenses were trying to outdo each other, and they were just beating the shit out of these offenses. I don't care. Navarro Bowman in this game, and again, he gets hurt at the end. It was the rest of his career. His career was over pretty much after this game, and that's a shame because he was a lights out linebacker, and I agree with you. I agree. At this season, he was the better linebacker. He was the best linebacker. And then the thing is, you look at Aldon Smith and what he did in 2012 with 19 and a half sacks, you would think you got Aldon Smith, you got Patrick Willis, and you got Navarro Bowman, and all these guys are under 25 years old. It was an embarrassment of riches that they had there, man. And you got Navarro Bowman, who was 25, Aldon Smith, who was 24, Patrick Willis, was 28. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, so he was the older statement, but again, in the prime of his career. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And you got all these three guys in that same linebacker core, and again, they were going to dominate for the next 5 years. But you get the injury to Bowman in this game. We all know what happened with Aldon Smith, and he had a great game in this game as well. The first play of the game, he strip sacks Russell Wilson, and you're thinking this game is over, man, at this point, but he was such a great pass rusher, man. I think he broke the record for his first two seasons on the amount of sacks he had. It was something crazy like that, and he was just a great player. But watching, again, Willis and Bowman in that middle was so much fun because, again, they were both, and it's very cliches, but they were both sideline to sideline guys. But not only did they have the speed to catch anything east-west, but they were so physical up the middle, man, that you just couldn't run up the middle. And then you talked about Smith and the defensive line. If you got through him, you had to face those two guys. It was just – and then you had two safeties in Whitfield. He was coming and knocking your head off. You know what I'm saying? It was just another physical-ass defense here.
No, and I think, honestly, they didn't have enough long of a run to get this. But this linebacking core could have competed with the Dome Patrol Saints of the late 80s, early 90s if they would have had more time together. And that says a lot from a guy like me who I love that Dome Patrol linebacking core. One of my favorite units in football, all sport. I love all four of those guys.
Yeah, they were great, yeah.
And they could have, which to me, that's an all-time, people say, some people will call that the greatest. I wouldn't call them the greatest linebacking core, but some people call the Dome Patrol the greatest linebacking core. These guys could have gotten that if they would have had more time together. Like, they were that special. And that's the thing. There's so many guys on this defense. Legion of Boom, I'm not going to call, like, so everyone listen to me. I know I've made some, for some people, hot takes. They're not the Steel Curtain, in my opinion.
Nah.
Now, what I laugh at, though, is the same kind of a thing, which is like the Steel Curtain was originally like the defensive line, but then we kind of just call the whole defense the Steel Curtain. The Legion of Boom is kind of like the secondary, but we kind of give it to the whole defense. And both cases, rightfully so, because Jose, I don't know. When I look at like Seattle, when I flip it over to them, we focus on the secondary. The best player on that defense, and to me, you could argue Earl Thomas fighting with Bobby Wagner.
Yeah.
And the linebacker that Bobby Wagner was, 2013, his second year. And then he has just put up absolute
Hall of Famer.
Hall of Fame numbers where I think hands down the best linebacker of the 2010s is Bobby Wagner. And
Yeah.
I really do think he makes a run, which also knocks Richard Sherman down a peg. He makes a run at, you could say, is the overall career-wise, the best maybe defensive player for the Seahawks.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, you can look at these units and break these units down. I mean, because you got Bobby Wagner in the middle, who is the quintessential sideline guy. Like, you were not getting away from Bobby Wagner, right? You got another young linebacker in KJ Wright, who was another. I'm not saying he was a great linebacker, but he was all over the place, right? And then you got Bruce Irvin, who was more of like a pass rusher, like more of a physical guy. But
Michael Bennett.
My God. Like, we can definitely get into the defensive line too. You got Chris Averill, who was just a pass rush machine. I mean, it's Cliff Averill, excuse me. It was a pass rush machine. So they had it all. This defense had it all, but they were so. They had so much speed, man. Like you were not running east-west on these guys. Like, they were going to catch you and they were going to bring you down. Like, from the defensive line, from the linebackers to the DBs, it was just a outstanding. Like, I can't talk about this defense more, man. Like, it was just speed everywhere, man.
No, for sure, and we have to say, what in 2013 the Seahawks did. So they not just win the Super Bowl. And we know what they did in the Super Bowl to an all-time quarterback, an all-time offense with Peyton Manning and the 2013 Broncos. But you got to look at 2013, the Seahawks led the league in points allowed, yards allowed, and takeaways. First team to do that since the infamous 85 Bears. So, that's historical stuff, what they did, the Legion of Boom.
Yeah, when you're compared to the 85 Bears and any defensive stat, like you're doing something great. And But again, we've been talking about it. It's like, the name of the game on defense is points allowed, right? Like, I think that and turnovers is the most important thing. And when you lead the league in that, you're doing something right. Now they can get to the quarterback, and now they're turning the ball over to it. It was just, again, like, they had everything you want a defense to have, right? They can play physical. They can run around and catch you anywhere you're at in the field. They can play man-to-man. They can take away, the running game and put 8 in the box, right, with that secondary. If they needed to play off, if you weren't running the ball, they were going to, it was just, they could bring Maxwell in as a third corner. And now you're playing like nickel. And it's just, they still had the ability with Chancellor to come in and bring him down in the box. And that's still another linebacker. It was just, there was no real weak spots in both of these defenses, but in particular this Legion of Boom defense, the Seattle defense, there was no weak spots. There was nowhere you can really attack. I think you can look at this 49ers defense, and again, very similar to this season's in 2023. It's like maybe the cornerback position was their weakest, but even that, like, you got Eric Reed running around, playing safety, free safety, and he was just getting to everything too. So there was no weak spots here.
See, and I'll let the listeners know it's just hard because it's like I'm salivating talking about how Jose is too. So there's so many angles to take with what you just said. So bear with me. I'm going to go, but I'm just going to let it fly.
Go ahead. Do your thing.
we've you check our archive, we talked about 49ers Cowboys in the 90s, and those games were pretty much like whoever won that championship game, the Super Bowl, you knew was
Yeah.
a far gone kind of like a aftermath thought. Do you look at it and do you think that in this championship game 2013, do you think whoever won this game were going to beat the Broncos, or do you think if San Fran wins this game, do the Broncos maybe win, or is it a closer game? Like, or do you think this was the Super Bowl?
Yeah, I think this was a Super Bowl. I think the 49ers beat that Broncos team as well because, my only thing was that, Seattle's secondary was it was better. It was much
It was
better.
definitely a lot better
Than the 49ers secondary. So I think Denver, it would have been a much closer game. I think Denver puts up more points, but I think the 49ers keep it close enough, and I do think the 49ers beat the Broncos. Now, again, that Broncos team was no joke. That Broncos offense was all-time great. But I just think the way these two defenses played and how they could put pressure on the quarterback, it didn't matter who was playing on offense, in the Super Bowl. I think either one of these two teams was going to win, and obviously Seattle did. But, I do think the 49ers go in there and handle business against the Broncos. But that's an interesting question, though, for sure.
I can be honest, in 2013, I did not think that. But now, 10 years later, looking back, I do think, and I agree with everything you said, honestly. I think the Niners win, but it's a lot closer game because of the second. That's the difference. The secondary, which was good, but it wasn't arguably what Seattle had, which arguably is the greatest secondary maybe in NFL history. So, and Peyton, I feel like that's what gets them. You got to have a pass rush, of course, but like when he can't pick apart, when he can't just, all right, the rush is coming, but hey, he knows where, guess what, this receiver's going here. I can just, boom, hit you. When he had to like, nobody's open, he was done. It didn't happen often, get credit to Peyton, but I think that's why he had no answer for Seattle. I think he would have had a little bit more of an answer with San Fran, but he would have been getting hit. Like that Bronco O-line was not going to be slowing down that Niner defense either, that front seven. So it would have been tough for Peyton either way, but a lot better, I think, than with the San Fran than it would have been Seattle. So that always kind of stuck out with me because when you have that conference rivalry like the way this one is, you kind of wonder, like, is that the Super Bowl? And I'm grateful in today's championship games coming up, we don't have that. I feel like whoever comes out victorious in 2023, that's championship game, we're going to have a really good Super Bowl matchup. But I kind of wonder about this year, was that the same thing? So that's why I wanted to ask you.
Yeah, no, I think so. I just think, and again, it shows in this 3-year run, right? The year before the 49ers were in the Super Bowl. Obviously, 2013, Seattle gets in and get in again. In 2014, we all know what happened there. But no, I think this was the class of the NFL, and quietly it was because, again, you saw what Denver was doing and New England was doing. They were putting up all these crazy points and stats, and it's just like, no, at the end of the day, if you have these shutdown defenses and physical defenses who take the ball away and you have an opportunity to win a lot of games. And Seattle won 13 games this season, something like that. So, they were a really, really good team as well. And I just think also in that Super Bowl, again, it goes back to, Kaepernick versus Wilson. And I just think the blowout happens because, again, Seattle has the better quarterback, and Denver has more of an opportunity because Colin Kaepernick is not doing what Russell Wilson is doing. So
Right, absolutely. Now, I kind of look at these teams and I'm kind of like, because, man, it's not that long ago. There's people still in the league from these, these teams and these, like, so it's not that, but it does feel, honestly, watching it, I'm like, man, like the hits don't seem like that now, like we did in this game. And these are special defenses, we know that. But do you see, like, when you look at this game and these two franchises, do you see kind of an impact, like from 2013 to like now? Do you see where like any trends that like, the other teams were copying these guys and we kind of see something about these teams in today's NFL, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think, in this era, I think philosophies started to like change a little bit, and it had already started to change, I think, in my opinion. But you know, with these two teams, I think obviously it's a copycat league, so people are going to try to do it. But everybody can't draft the way these two teams were drafting at this time. And I think the emphasis started where it's like pass rush, right? Like defensive line and defensive backfield. Like I think, and again, these two teams have great linebacker cores. Like, so it's not like it's because what they were doing, but I think teams started to really understand, like, if you can put pressure on the quarterback and have a really good, like, some really good DBs, you can get away with having like subpar linebacker play. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah, good point.
I remember, and I can just think vividly of like, I can go back to like these Eagles teams for so long, right? That they don't even look at the linebacker. And Jim Johnson was like that too. Like, they had decent linebackers with Trotter and, Carl Emmons for a minute there. Like, but it was more about getting to the quarterback and having great defensive backs and having great, the ability to kind of slow a wide receiver up and give that pass rush enough time. And I just think the league starts to shift a little bit because especially with what happened in the Super Bowl, when you can see what they did to the Broncos offense. And it's just like, if you can put pressure on the quarterback, no matter who the quarterback is, and slow these wide receivers down, you're going to have a good chance of winning that game. I think that kind of shifted in this era where it was just like, no, you got to have like the front seven has to be dominant. And it's just like, no, you don't really need that. Like, if you have adequate linebacker play, you can get away with winning a lot of games. And that's why, in my opinion, I think that's what shifted with these defensive teams.
No, that's interesting, and that's true. Like, we do see the linebacking core. Like, growing up so long, like, you got to have linebackers, and,
right,
and you got to have them, and either three, four, enough that like you got to have four sometimes. And now it's like a lot of times, watching the Cowboys playing the Niners, they two linebackers out there. That's really it. Like, it's kind of like a different. And that's a great. I didn't think about that, but yeah, like the linebackers kind of starting to. We see the running backs over the past 10 years losing value, but the linebackers kind of have lost their value. Not that they're not, both are important, but they don't have the same emphasis like you've had throughout most of NFL history,
And I think when you have good ones, they stick out so much. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
Because you can still do a lot with them, but the evolution of the tight end has really also played a part in that, where it's like you can't put a tight end on these. You can't put a linebacker on these tight ends anymore. Like, if you can, you're lucky. You're going to have a really good defense, but you got to have an extra DB in there. A lot of teams are running nickel most of the time. Like, they're starting the game off in nickel, like you mentioned, like two linebackers and stuff. And it's just like you got to have an ability to get to this take away this tight end, and you're not doing it with most of the linebackers in the league today. So.
No, and that's where Cam Chancellor was effective.
Right.
Because also you weren't getting – so the trouble was you needed DB, but now you got a Gronk, a Jimmy Graham at this time, who they're 6'6", 6'7".
Yeah.
They're so tall, so it's like, well, yeah, you can't put a linebacker, but you got to have a DB, but they're so much shorter and smaller. Cam Chancellor fit everything.
Yeah.
And, yeah, the only guy I've seen, like you mentioned earlier, to be able to, like, mark Gronk one-on-one, and it was an interesting, great matchup, was Cam Chancellor. And, like, that kind of was like something that people, you're right, you needed that hybrid guy. And he wasn't the first, but he kind of brought in a new emphasis and a new wave on it. So I think, yeah, like, that's a great point. I was looking at a lot of times now, I feel like the past decade, we're seeing teams, they're trying to build and get guys around the quarterback and like through the draft and maybe some free agency, but they're trying to win when they get that quarterback on like a cheaper deal
contract. Yeah,
right. And I feel like this kind of like started it with like Russell here and like this and like trying to like kind of, all right, we'll get them while they're on that rookie deal and we can kind of build around and kind of do that. And I feel like now that's a common thing in today's NFL. It's like, all right, trying to win now before we got to go pay this quarterback so much money and pay him the bank. Let's get it all in now. We saw that with Mahomes and we've seen it with other guys. So it's just like, I feel like that, to me, I didn't really hear about that or see that as a league or franchise model until after what the Seahawks did.
That's a great point too, because I didn't even think about that. And if you look at all three out of the four teams that are in this, and this championship weekend, all have three of them have quarterbacks in rookie deals. And
Right.
you got Purdy, you got Hurts. Who is going to change for Hurts? Is going to change for
Joe Burrow.
Joe Burrow. Is going to change for him too very soon. So these teams are taking advantage of that for sure. And I think you're 100% right. I think what the Seahawks were doing at this era were loading up on, especially defensively. They were just bringing guys in and signing guys. I mean, they did a great draft, did great job with the draft as well. But you can do a whole lot more when you got that quarterback, on that rookie deal. And then again, these two teams were definitely doing that, because if you look at the rest of that roster, they were totally loaded, and the quarterback was not getting paid. And then you see what happened: Russ gets paid, and then some of these guys start to leave. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't pay the quarterback a lot of money and then think you're going to keep a lot of guys. Like, you're going to have to draft well, and that's where a lot of teams suffer. Where it's like they can't draft well, so now your team is being depleted, and this guy's getting paid 30, 40 million. And you just can't. It's tough for you to win that way. Then you're going to try to sign free agents, and if you miss on a free agent, then you're definitely done for a couple of years. So that's a great point, because I didn't think about that, but I think you're 100% right. I think what the Seahawks did now, what they were doing in 2013, a lot of teams wanted to jump on that for sure, and they did.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. We can't. I wish we could, in a way, honestly, but we can't talk about this rivalry, because I feel like it was so much more than these two coaches. But a lot of times people point to these two coaches as like that's the start, and it's disappointing because of it's like who they are is. I'll be honest. I'm gonna let it out. I know I'm supposed to be my best to be kind of objective, but it was like Harbaugh and Carroll, and it's like for such an epic, hard hitting rivalry. It's like, oh, those are the two guys.
Yeah.
Those from the Pac-10.
Yeah.
That started this. It's like, but how much what do you think about when you think about Jim Harbaugh and Pete Carroll and their impact on this rivalry?
No, I think they brought some juice to it, though, for sure. Like, I just think the animosity, and if you're not familiar, Deremy was talking about, the Pac-10 guys at the time, and, Pete Carroll being at USC and Harbaugh being at Stanford, and those were great games too. And Stanford was the only real team that was out there that can match up with USC, maybe Oregon a little bit, but Stanford was the one I was seeing beating the USC often, and the way they were doing it was kind of the same makeup. They had, the great offensive lines, and, they were playing good defense, solid physical defense, and I just
running games, yeah.
In the running games, yeah, for sure. And then what happened was, I think he brought that philosophy with him in San Francisco, and then because again, Pete Carroll was hired 2010, and then Harbaugh was brought in 2011, so they had a little stuff going on from college. Not a little stuff. They didn't like each other, it seemed like, and you bring them to the NFL in the same division with these two teams, and they added some juice to it for sure. I don't really think of them two when I think about these two teams and what they were doing at this era, but I know a lot of people do, because it's it's a juicy story. But I do think they did, because they were both characters, especially Pete Carroll. You know what I'm saying? Like, he was a real big character, and they were really animated on the sidelines. You know what I mean? So it was like you see them getting excited. You see their teams behind them getting excited. So it brought a little bit of juice. I'll say that, but I don't think it's the reason why these two teams did not like each other.
No, and I think that's what I look at it as is like, all right, they're definitely a footnote in this rivalry,
right,
like a part of it. But I feel like, especially hindsight, be able to look back on it was so much more than those guys,
yeah,
and they're so. They may have started it, and we can give that coaching rivalry credit for helping to trigger it. But the front office moves, the build, taking certain guys from other people, and then obviously most importantly on the field, it's what is making this rivalry and how hard hitting and so much was on the line that I kind of, in our Bigger Than the Game, the way we can try to give our impact on sports history, don't want to give the Harbaugh Carroll that's that's why this rivalry, because that's the 10th reason why this rivalry is interesting to me. There's so much more to it, you know. What I will say, what I have to be honest about, when Seattle brought in Pete Carroll, I was one of the loudest people saying, what a mistake. It was a terrible move. And I can admit when I was wrong, I was dead wrong on Pete Carroll.
Yeah.
He obviously got a Super Bowl, went to 2 Super Bowls with him. And the Seahawks have been a competitive team throughout, since 2010.
Yeah.
With different faces, and we're seeing it now. They got their first year without Russell Wilson. This past year in 2022, now
people
we're in 23.
Wrote him off this year for sure.
People wrote him off, and they got to the playoffs.
Yeah,
they were in there. So Pete Carroll has done a better job than I thought. If I look at Deremy back in 2010, I thought USC. I thought as great of a run he had at USC left a lot on the table. And those later years, it was like, you can't go to Oregon State and beat Oregon State. Come on, man. And they were talented squads, and they couldn't get the job done. I thought
and how he left them too,
how he left them
was super suspect to me. And I was like, that was like a for lack of a better term, a bitch move, right? Like he had all this talent, and I didn't mean to jump in, Deremy, but he had all this talent, and they won a lot, and then when stuff started getting rough, he bailed on them. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I remember when he was hired, that was a conversation for sure.
Definitely, no, definitely it was. And to me, he was a prime example, and there's many of them this is for another episode, but of like the hypocrisy in college sports, but college football we could focus on, where players are suffering, but what was he got rewarded. Yep. For sanctions coming to USC and all that. But the players suffered. Reggie Bush suffered. Yep. Reggie Bush's legacy got tanked. His Heisman got taken away, but Pete Carroll got rewarded richly going back to the NFL. And there's no question he could say whatever. That was timed perfectly to get out while that ship is sinking. So I'm not a fan of Pete Carroll, I'll be honest, but I can honestly say he has far surpassed my expectations.
Yeah, I would say this about Pete Carroll. The one thing I didn't think was going to work was like that rah-rah, like energetic coach. That you can't sustain that. And I'll give him credit, he has. You know what I'm saying? Right. Like, he's very animated. He's one of those player coaches. And he was always like a really good defensive coach. Like, I can remember him with New England and all that, like back in the day. But I'll say this with these two coaches. What I think, what they did from being hired in 2010, 2011 from college was they brought that insight with a lot of these players. And yes, these two GMs were great, but they knew most of these guys, right? From that college, from their college tenure. And I'm sure that helped, when it came to draft time and getting these players. So yeah, I don't want to, again, it's not the first stone that I look at, we can step on when we talk about this rival, but their impact, I think, from that perspective was enormous. You know what I'm saying? Because, again, they knew that college game better than anyone, right? Like, who was then in the NFL? And when it comes to coaches, and I just think they brought that experience with them and the knowledge that they had of most of these guys. Pete Carroll drafts Richard Sherman. Richard Sherman played where? At Stanford. So he knew.
Under Jim Harbaugh.
Right. So he knew what Sherman can do. And not that Sherman was a first-round top 10 pick, but he knew Sherman from playing against them. So I just think from that perspective, they had a huge impact. But I think for this rivalry, I think that's where it ends, honestly.
I think that point, because Doug Baldwin the same, Stanford guy under Jim Harbaugh.
Right.
Jim Harbaugh did not take these guys. Pete Carroll did. And Pete Carroll did see them and stuff like that. And so he faced them in college. So, right. Okay. I think that's the most interesting part, if they're impacting this rivalry, is the fact that, how history could have changed if Jim Harbaugh saw more in his guys, honestly. Yeah. And who knows what he says. Maybe he might be able to say, revisionist history, I wanted them and we were going to, blah, blah, blah. He did not want those guys.
No.
He did not want, and those are two
Doug Baldwin
key guys.
Was undrafted, right?
Right.
Right.
So he didn't want him. So I think that's the most interesting part of those two coaches. Also on the flip side, though, I thought Jim Harbaugh was going to be a good fit in the NFL.
So did I. Yeah.
So that's where it's funny because.
And he was, and I think he was. I think he did a great job in the NFL with that 49ers team. And again, with the Alex Smith stuff, Alex Smith was a bust. Like, let's just keep it real. Like, and Jim Harbaugh helped turn that around, and Andy Reid helped turn that around too. But Jim Harbaugh was the starting point there.
He was the one,
right? And what he did with Kaepernick was impressive. So. He can coach, you know what I'm saying? Like, and I know there was rumors of him leaving Michigan now, which I wish would have happened, but
thank God.
Yeah, like that didn't happen. But I think he could be a really good NFL. He was a really good NFL head coach.
Right, his first 3 years, championship game appearance in each of those years, and a Super Bowl appearance.
Right.
So I mean, he came out swinging, and to be fair, you could say he had that team. No. Because Mike Singletary wasn't leading these guys,
nope.
And the Niners had a lot of these pieces before. Staley and Vernon, and they weren't winning nothing.
Yeah,
they were a losing team until Jim Harbaugh brought his philosophy.
I can't win with them. I can't win with them.
Can't do it. Can't do it. I want winners.
And he had them.
Yeah.
Whatever. I like Mike Singletary as a coach too. I think he was a good linebacker coach for Baltimore and all that, and he helped develop Ray Lewis even better than when he was.
He wasn't ready to be a head coach.
No. And he still had a little bit of success his first year, but that was it. Yeah. But again, I agree with you, Deremy. Like, these two coaches get talked about like too much when it comes to these two teams and these games in between this little era where we're talking about. But again, it goes back to like the great players that both these teams had, and again the animosity they have for each other. But I think the way they were built so similar that I just think they just try to always outdo themselves, and that's what made these games tremendous to watch.
Yeah, a funny thing is I think what I also liked is I think it's cool when you see in all sports. A team now. San Fran had been in the spotlight. They had won. They had the Montana Wall. So we've seen San Fran. But when you get a team that's not really in the spotlight, a franchise, and then they kind of emerge and they get that popularity. And I know Seattle did go to the Super Bowl with Mike Holmgren in 05, and they had Sean Alexander, but they weren't on that like national stage. Like, they played in the bowl, but not everyone was like talking about them. But then it was cool here. Like, I think. To see like the old versus the new. The Niners were the established franchise, and then Seattle's this like they've been around, but they never had really gotten this attention like that.
Right.
And I think like that's what I kind of liked. It kind of I compare it to like Golden State.
Yes, very good.
One thing I've loved about the Warriors is seeing them get that spotlight, and it's a city that I always knew because I had family out there. Like, they love basketball. They were hungry for it, and they could get over that hump. And you'll see that fan base. And you had little glimmers, Run TMC, the Warriors with Barron, and they beat the Mavs, and that 06 or 07, I think 07. So like you had some showings, but then now that this dynasty happened, it was like, wow, the Warriors, Oracle, like it's cool to see them be on the NBA map and be on the top of it. That's kind of how I felt about Seattle at this time. Like, it was cool to see them get on that map and get that attention, because it's not a place we're used to. All right, I love it. Lambeau. We when they're successful, we know the Lambeau thing. Pittsburgh, if it's the Giants, the Cowboys, I love our traditional teams, but it's cool to see these teams that aren't in the spotlight. They're a newer franchise, and they get to rise and they get to share that stage.
Yeah, and they rose and stood there. You know what I'm saying? Like, and they left their mark on the league for sure. And again, the run is sort of still continuing. I know it's like a totally different like face of the team, but you look at what they did for the city of Seattle. You know what I'm saying? Like,
right.
And they had that 12th man thing. It's like a huge thing, and the name of the stadium is slipping my mind, but I keep thinking Safeco, but it's not Safeco.
It's Equester. I should know the stadium too.
It's.
I know it's CenturyLink, but I don't feel like it was always. It was something
Nah,
else
it was something
before.
else. Yeah, but it's slipping my mind. But when you think about loud, venues and arenas or stadiums, that's one of the first ones you think about now. And the way they developed that stadium and how they kind of the architect, however he did that, like kind of the way they built it is like just makes it in a louder and louder place. And it was the best home field advantage for what, 8 or 9 years. You know what I'm saying?
A
Like,
long time, yeah.
yeah. So you add that to this mix, and you add that to this defense, and them being able to get that jump, and it was just a perfect storm. And kudos to the Seahawks fans, like they made that place a tough place to go in there and win. And a lot of teams couldn't do it. You know what I'm saying? A lot of teams couldn't go in there and win. 49ers were one of those teams that could, but we're talking about 2013, and then starting 2014, the Seahawks going a 10-0 run against the 49ers. And we touched on it a little bit earlier. I think the development of Russell Wilson, and again, losing Bowman, Patrick Willis retiring, and then everything what happened with Aldon Smith and his issues off the field just kind of decimated this defense, and and just kind of brought them back to normal. You know what I'm saying? And again, when the 49ers retooled and, did that, like, then that changed. But again, like, Seattle took off, and 49ers after the season were pretty much done.
Yeah, it really did hurt them. And you mentioned the crowd, and it was Quest Field, so it was Quest, now Century, Link. But it has a unique design that was built to make it noisier. It is such a noisy place. Everybody, you hear players, coach, they say loudest stadium. They're going to say Seattle, and that's really cool to see, and to see them this past decade get that shine. And I love that mix. I love the mix of the tradition and the old. I love watching a game at Lambeau. We talked about it. If you listen to our show, those NFC East teams and that rivalry. That's awesome. I love that. But I love seeing these new places come up because it's a different experience, and it's like that whole connecting the country thing. Right. So I give it a lot of credit, and that was cool. And I can say when you watch this 2013 championship game, the most hype, I don't remember Joe Buck being that hyped for a game. Joe Buck was ready to go, man.
Yeah, at the beginning of that game, he was all about the stadium, man. He was all about the crowd, and he was even saying it, man. This is one of the loudest places he's ever been. And I mean, if you go back, man, he was ready to go, man. Joe Buck looked like he was about to throwing the cleats on or something.
That's something. Like I've heard him get excited for a call. It's like the whole game, and it's a great game. I mean, it's an exciting game. But he's hyped from like that intro. And Joe Buck, to me, when he did do those Fox intros, he was kind of like,
this year he was bad with them, but
he wasn't that great.
Yeah,
we'll give him a pass. First year Monday Night Football.
Yeah,
maybe he needs to.
I like Joe Buck though. A lot of people.
I do too.
Him. So a lot of people really hate him. I like Joe Buck.
I like Joe Buck. I think had a really tough task, being the son of a legendary broadcaster like that, and not easy being the lead for both football and baseball. I think baseball, I miss him, honestly.
I was just going to say that. With this run this year the Phillies had, I was like, man, like Joe Davis did a great job, but like I was like, man, I was thinking about it earlier when I was watching the game, and I was like, man, like I miss Joe Buck doing baseball.
Yeah, I think he's better at baseball, and I think the broadcasts haven't been the same for like these playoffs since he's been gone. But Joe Buck was excited. He was hyped for this. So I got to give him credit. And it's weird because I feel like if you show this game to a younger person, a kid who is maybe in high school now, right? Maybe starting college age, so anywhere 14 to 18 or something like that. I think they would think a lot of this is boring, Jose, because it's not like they're so used to up and down scoring, and that's the only way I feel like younger generation of football fans feel like it can be exciting. But man, it's an exciting game from start to finish with those hard hits. It's physical. And I know you said it on here. I gave you credit a lot when we did football episodes. You missed those defensive struggle games. And we know like why it's changed and things do evolve, I guess, but it just kind of reminded me of that, of a thing that you bring up. I miss these hard-hitting defensive battles. Like, I'm not saying every game needs to be like that, but when we can mix that in there and we can have it, it's a beautiful thing to watch.
Yeah, that's why like I couldn't wait for this Dallas 49ers game. I knew exactly what it was going to be like coming into the weekend, and I knew what those defenses were going to do because again, you have two really good defenses this year. Like they try to outdo each other, man, and they get jacked for these games, man. And that's was that these two offenses were getting beat the hell up this past weekend. And that's what these games were like with Seattle and 49ers. And again, like yeah, you mentioned, I love those games, because those are like the nail biter games. Like those are the ones that any minute now it could be a strip sack, and the ball can be going the other way, or the interception, or whatever the case may be. Man, like when you have dominant defenses like that, I remember watching that Bills Chiefs game last year. It was like 41-42. Like yeah, that was fun to watch, but for me, man, I'm give me 21-17 with you know, just great hitting and all that good stuff, man. And just like the intensity, because you can feel that intensity. When it's an up and down game, there's no intensity there. They're just running up the score. When you have teams like this who play like this, there's a lot of intensity, and that comes through the TV.
No, I think a game like this, and I'm not saying it's a great game. I'm not going to call it like a top 10 of all time or nothing.
Nah, nah.
But I think a game I love is like the first half is like kind of like a gridlock. It's hard hitting, and like in halftime there's a lot of adjustments because they're like we can't move the ball on them. The third quarter you see some things open up, and in that fourth you see them kind of going, and like you said, it's like 21-17, 24-21. But you look at the halftime score, it was like 7-6 or something like that.
Right.
Like I love a game like that where it's like the offense kind of has to figure out how to overcome a defense. Where, like you said, that Bills Chiefs divisional playoff game last year was a great game, but it almost felt like, hey, the defense just like whoever can just throw in the towel first. Like the defense is just they're like nonchalant, like flag football, and I'm like this. I'm like, it's not a competition. It's just whoever gets the ball last. Yeah. It wasn't like, oh, Buffalo's going to stop KC. It's like, oh, man, you hear Romo, you gave Mahomes a chance, and it's like, yeah, you gave him a chance. You're going to lose because there's no defense. Yeah. I don't like that. Like that takes a little bit away from it for me. So it's a little bit frustrating sometimes watching the game now. I'm not trying to be old man, get off my lawn. It's just I really do feel – if you show it to I wonder if you show it to your son, would he appreciate the game as much? Like, your son's 18.
Yeah.
If he watches this, like the whole game through, is he going to be like, yeah? Or will he think until the fourth quarter it's a boring game? I kind of wonder.
Yeah, I'm going to put that. I might put that to the test. And come back with some reports.
Yeah, I'm curious. I really am, because your son's a fan.
Yeah,
he knows the game. So I'd love to see if I hope I'm pleasantly surprised. I'm wrong, because this is a great game and it is like it's great hitting. But for 3/4 of this game, the Niners are up.
Yeah,
the Niners are leading really throughout. And Jose, when I was rewatching, getting ready for this show, we know which one, if you do a legendary defense and all that, Seattle is way going to be above this Niner one in people's minds. What would you say if I said for 3/4 of this, it looked like the Niners defense was outplaying the Seahawk defense? And now both defenses are doing their thing, but that Niner defense going on the road, going into, at the time, Quest Field, how loud it is, that Niner defense, it almost looks like they were outplaying the Seahawk defense for the first 3/4.
Yeah, they were. I'll agree with that 100%. And you touched on it earlier when we were talking about that linebacker core. Like, I think personally, and you said it too, Deremy. Like, I think when Navarro Bowman got hurt, I think the whole game shifted. You know what I'm saying? Because again, one, that was a turnover. Like, if we're being honest, like that was a turnover. And again, like they didn't score because they got the ball back anyway. But like, if they keep that turnover, and it was such a great play, like that just gives you even more energy, as a team. But I think once he gets hurt, that's it. Like, I just think that 49ers defense wasn't playing as well, which they needed to do, And again, I just think they lost a big time leader, and it really, I don't want to say took the steam out of the defense, but again, you could see what happened to them afterwards. And Russ started making bigger plays. Dudes started getting open over the middle, and it was just a domino effect. But yeah, I think that's the most. I think that was the biggest play of the game.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I think people may say, but like, yeah, he's not, and that's the thing about the game. We got to watch it because he's not an offensive player. So what about Navarro Bowman leaving because Patrick Willis was the heart and soul. Navarro Bowman was the enforcer. Yeah. Navarro Bowman, I don't care what anyone says in that Seahawk offense. If to me the guy you feared the most. And for 2013, that's Navarro Bowman. You might say Justin Smith is a close second for what he's doing, who you get the game plan or who can really. But I think at this point, Navarro Bowman was that guy. He brought to an already confident group of guys. He brought a different kind of swag. It was a quiet confidence, and I feel like when he went down, it shifted. I feel like the Niners kind of went like, "Oh man," and the Seahawks said, "We got a chance."
Yep. That was the opportunity. Yeah.
Right.
And I think it goes back to what you were talking about with Patrick Willis. It's like Patrick Willis is still in the game, right? So why should that have changed so much? And it was because, again, that season Bowman was the better player. You know what I mean?
Right.
If you didn't believe that when Deremy said it at first, I just think the proof's in the pudding what happened after that injury. And again, the whole game shifted, and that was because they lost their best defensive player.
And what we said here, because I really do think, and Kaepernick gets overlooked for the run he had, and I do think Colin Kaepernick, he's not the biggest case of this, but he's a case of if he came out a little bit later, what kind of player he would have been. I feel like he's a little bit. This isn't quite. They're starting to bring in RPOs. We talked about it in the previous episode with the early 2010 Eagles, like they're starting to do that, but it's not what you're seeing now, like that college game fully up here in the NFL. They're running the pistol with Colin Kaepernick, but I think if he comes in like 5 years later where they start building offenses directly for quarterback, like we see with like Lamar Jackson in Baltimore and things like that, I think Colin Kaepernick is different. But I do think the fourth quarter, you see the difference.
Yeah.
And Russell, which is so easy to pick on Russ in 2023 for what he did this past year with Denver. But we got to remember the career he had in Seattle and the dynamic player. And they don't win a Super Bowl without Russell Wilson.
Absolutely not. And, we touched on it a few times. I think, his evolution is what put them past the 49ers. And it started with this game. It started with this fourth quarter, and it was just him stepping up and making more plays than what Colin Kaepernick can do. And Kaepernick missed some throws in this fourth quarter. Russ didn't. Russ made more plays with his feet. Russ got dudes open with his feet, and it was just, again, the Bowman thing happened, and I think the 49ers were like in shock because they knew that was a big injury. That did not look good right from the jump. And I just think that was part one, and then part two was what Wilson was able to do in the fourth quarter. And I give him credit, man. Like, you talked about him being clutch earlier in the show. He was. You know what I'm saying? Like, I've seen him do that to a lot of teams, and when you think the Seahawks are down and they're down 8 or 9, and it's like, no, Russ is going to make a bunch of plays and he's going to put you in a position to win the game. I've seen him do that often, and this game here was for me like one of the first big moments that I was like, yo, this dude is legit. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, he had a great season. They went 13-3 in the second year. But I was like, this dude is going to be a great player.
And because you're looking at it, he's taken a lot of hits from this team. The Niners are coming after him. We mentioned earlier probably the big edge that the Niners had, in my opinion, over the Seahawks was the offensive line. The Seahawks O-line it was okay. It wasn't an elite level O-line like the Niners at this era had. So he has to do a lot of running around. And sometimes you can look at it and be like, is he holding the ball too long or what's he doing? But I feel like in this game, he kind of had to make like these Houdini plays because Alden Smith was coming after him. Before Bowman got hurt, he was. Justin Smith's coming up the middle. He kind of had to run around, and the fact that he's extending the play and he hits that a big pass to Baldwin, he gets that 35-yard touchdown pass to Jermaine Kearse to get their first lead, early in the fourth. That was just huge stuff, Jose.
Yeah, he was playing great. He took over the game, man, and I guess I don't know if he does that with Bowman still playing. I think he still does. You know what I'm saying? Like, and as great as Bowman was, and as great he was playing that game, yeah, his injury was a big deal, but I still think Russ is making these plays. You know what I'm saying? Like, maybe he may get one or two less, but again, that touchdown to Curse is still happening. You know what I'm saying? That big play to Baldwin is still happening. Like, I just think Russ stepped his game up, man, big time. And again, it was just not his coming out party, but it was just that, for me, that one big moment where it was like, this dude is legit, man. He's going to be a great player in this league for the next 10 years, man. And he was putting it – he was showing the country right there, like, what he was made out of. And, again, they went 13-3. He made a lot of great plays this season, but he took over this fourth quarter, man. And, again, that's where it was just a glimpse of, like, where these two teams were going. It was just like one team had the better quarterback, and the other quarterback couldn't make enough plays. Russ did, and they won the ball game.
Really, they did. And, they get a field goal to go up 23-17. But I just will say this, Bowman gets hurt on what was a fumble, and he winds up coming down with, like I said earlier, and they missed that call and give it back to Seattle.
Yeah. And
they're on the 1 yard line. They hand it off to Marshawn Lynch, and this is something that people talk about a lot for a different game. Mm-hmm. Marshawn gets hit. That ball goes out, fumble. 49 get the ball back. I don't know, Jose. I've always thought this. Even I forgot about that play. Yeah, not the Bowman play. The Bowman play sticks out.
Yeah.
I never forgot that one because it was the end of a great career, honestly, like you said, with Navarro Bowman. But people that next year, Malcolm Butler's interception, we still hear it. You should have just ran the ball with Lynch. I was one of the few people that I knew back then that I didn't think it was a bad call. I thought it was just a great play made by Malcolm Butler.
Yeah.
But I didn't think it was a bad call, like a bad decision. It's just it was great coaching and a great play by Malcolm Butler. I'd like people to look at this because it's not a guarantee that if you just hand it off to Lynch for, another couple more downs, he's automatically going to get in there against that Patriot defense the next year. People think it was a beast mode. He would have got, and he was a great short distance runner. But it's not a guarantee because we see that Niner D, that ball came out pretty good in this championship game, and that fumble happened. So I just want people to remember that who just say that was a terrible call, worst call Super Bowl history. Not so fast, my friends.
Yeah, there's some history behind that. Yeah, there's always history behind every play, and I'm trying to remember, like, he might have been fumbling that ball before he even got hit. Like, it was just like a rough exchange, and he didn't have full control of the ball, but when he took that hit, that ball popped out. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it wasn't like he just fell. It popped out, and I'm surprised they didn't run that back. But I thought when that happened, I was like, here we go. Like, the 49ers are going to drive down the field and win this game. And again, you can make mistakes like that when you have a great defense behind you, and it's going to be hard again, we talked about Alex Smith and how they needed bigger plays, big, like, more of explosive plays. They needed one of those in that drive, and they just couldn't come up with it. And, again, the Seahawks defense did what they do. They didn't lose anybody. You know what I'm saying? Like, they were still healthy and playing well, and there was no way Kaepernick was going to drive down and win that game for them.
No, I mean, so we got to look at it. That last drive, the Niners did move the ball quickly, down to the red zone, and they needed that touchdown, to tie it up and the extra point to take the lead. We had mentioned him, Cliff Averill. You brought him up earlier. That a heck of a pass rushing, DN, and he got after Colin Kaepernick, and Kaepernick, what he did the same year before to lose the Super Bowl to the Ravens. That fade to the right side of the end zone to Michael Crabtree, and you see Richard Sherman making the play of his life, getting that tip.
Got him in the Hall of Fame.
Guy gets him in wrongly in the Hall of Fame probably, but Richard Sherman gets that tip to Malcolm Smith to go get that interception and pretty much lock up the NFC Championship for the Seahawks.
Let's send you down to the field and Aaron Andrews.
Joe, thank you so much. Richard, let me ask you the final play. Take me through it.
Well, I'm the best corner in the game.
That's right.
When you try me with a sorry receiver like Crabtree, that's the result you're going to get. Don't you ever talk about me.
Who was talking about you?
Crabtree, don't you open your mouth about the best. Or I'm going to shut it for you real quick. LOB.
All right.
Oof. I ain't gonna lie. I
infamous.
was like, that's what I'm talking about, man. You know, I became a fan right there. But he was right though. He was right
About which part?
about trying him with Crabtree. You know what I mean?
Right.
he was
Not the
about
best
that.
corner in the game, but I say
No, he
Yeah,
wasn't
Michael-
the best corner in the game.
Michael Crabtree, was not
Nah.
on that level. I agree with that. But let's go to that, because Richard Sherman, and that's what made me conflicted with him throughout his career, is he did a lot of things that I didn't like. He was, I'll be honest, annoying in a lot of ways, but then he brought up good points, which made me would be like, you're annoying, but I'm going to defend you here because people are taking it too far with their criticism. And everything, to me, it's summed up with what happened after the play. And with this interview, defines Richard Sherman, in my opinion, which it's so conflicting as like the athlete, which is, I thought it was wrong. I looked at him as wrong. That play's tough. It just happened. Crabtree, hands on it, he's walking. They just blew their chance to go back to the Super Bowl. He's down. So you run over, you pat him on the butt, and try to shake his hand. He doesn't want that. I don't blame him for pushing you out the way. To me, after the game, you can shake a hand. But in that moment, what are you doing? And that's how I felt.
Yeah, I didn't like that either. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I don't blame Crabtree. But again, plus there's history there. It's not like this is the first game where they were going at it. There's history there, and that's the thing. Like, I think that's where I don't think Richard Sherman was doing it to like show him up. I thought he was sincere, like in going up to him and, you know, shaking his hand, because they were probably just getting it on the whole game, and they've been getting it on for a couple years at this point. But I just think he needed to wait 10 minutes, like, you know what I'm saying, like, and just let Crabtree kind of like process everything that just happened. You know, if he running around and, you know, cheering and all that stuff, like, you know, then goes up to him and shakes his hand, and then Crabtree does that, then I get it. Like, then you can go on a rant and talk your stuff. But I think, like, I just think it was poor judgment on his part, like, to go up to him immediately after that play happens and try to shake his hand and stuff like that. Because again, there was history. It's not like there wasn't history before. If it wasn't history, then I'm like, all right, Crabtree, what are you doing? Like, you're kind of like, I get you're upset, but the dude's coming up to you to shake his hand. But there was a lot of history between these two guys. You just can't do it at that moment.
There's a lot of history, and I do think, in a weird way, you're right. He was initially trying to be sincere, but it's all weird, right? Because Crabtree's going. It's not like even like the play happened and they're right next to each other. He going to
down.
Yeah, he chased. So let him go at that point is what I say. Let him go. Like, it's not like he's right next to you and then you do that. You chase him down, the pat on the butt, and then I don't blame it. Like, it's the heat of the emotion. It just freaking happened.
Yeah.
He was wrong, in my opinion, and I still feel that way to this day for that. Now, the interview is whatever, but where I get conflicted and where I have to defend him is then what so many pundits, former coaches, broadcasters said about Richard Sherman after that Aaron Andrews interview, and calling him a thug and calling him all these things. And Richard Sherman saying what, thug, a code word for the N-word, a code word, and then me being like, absolutely. And the criticism went way too far. So that whole thing sums up how I feel about Richard Sherman off the field a lot of times, which is, man, you annoy me, but then, yes, they're using these words against you just because they don't, how you look, color your skin, you have braids, and they're forgetting that you're a Stanford educated guy.
Dude. It's an intelligent dude.
Very intelligent dude, and not just intelligent for a football player, intelligent period, Richard Sherman, is, and yet they're missing that point, and they're going with these critiques of he's thug, he's this, and all that stuff, which was furthest from the truth about Richard Sherman.
Right, and I think that intelligence helped him be the player that he was, right? He wasn't the fastest dude, like, but he can anticipate. Sure. He studied film. Obviously, they all study film, but when you're like an intelligent dude like that, and you're putting in that type of work, then you're going to get a lot of those results. But I agree. Like, he was the one thing I didn't like about the interview. It took away from the game, right? It took away from what those two teams were doing, what those two defenses were doing, what Russ did in the fourth quarter, and it became all about Richard Sherman and Michael Crabtree, right? I love loud dudes like that. Like, I just love it, man. You know what I'm saying? And I just think there's a time and place for that. Like, he put himself before, like, the team and, like, all those cliches, right, that you hear. But they were talking real crazy about Richard Sherman. I don't think that was called for. And if you want to say he was taken away from the team and all that, I'm there with you. Like, I agree with that. But you can't – stuff they were saying that is absolutely not true. And he's probably one of the smartest players in the league, and I just think it was the look and all that. Like, he was going off, and it just didn't look good it didn't look right for him. Because I remember watching this game and I was like, damn, like, what is this dude doing? Like, he's talking some crazy stuff and then he just walks off, and it was I don't know if it was a bad moment for him, but it was just a moment that's going to stick out forever in his career. And it's just like, when you think of Richard Sherman, you think of this interview, and again, like, he made a great play on the ball. He didn't intercept the ball, but Malcolm Smith intercepted it. And then Malcolm Smith becomes a Super Bowl MVP the next game. And, it was a great play, but it was just taken away by the interview.
It was. I do think the interview was wrong. I think many people used that as a chance to attack him. Yeah. And attack Seattle.
Right.
And this team, they were loud and brash. And it's the thing that we've seen in sports over and over. When it's not the establishment, when it's an upstart. And I know they're all NFL franchises, but Seattle, they weren't the 49ers. Mm-hmm. They weren't these other teams. They weren't the New England Patriots. So, hey, you got this guy who is talking trash saying, I'm going to stop Tom Brady. And then he goes up to him after he does it and then said, hey, you mad, bro? People didn't like that. People were like, who is this team in the West Coast? Who are these guys, these low-round draft picks talking noise? People don't like that. And I think, hey, they beat the Niners, and then he's going to get the golden boy, Peyton Manning, and all that stuff. People didn't want to see this team. They didn't want this team. A lot of those establishment guys, I'll be real, the old white guys covering the game, wanted to see Peyton Manning, crown him, and he's the greatest at that point, looking at the greatest quarterback of all time. They didn't want to see these guys doing this. So I do feel like it went too far with the interview, but the criticism was unnecessary, and that's why I was like, man, you're giving him a chance to do that. But I do love how he responded at that time to what a lot of people were saying too.
I do too. I love how he responded. He was going on shows and just kind of like breaking a lot of those, like, like what they were saying about him. He was breaking it down and he was putting it right back in their faces, but in a very, like, respectful, intelligent way that they couldn't even argue back after that. It was like, you didn't hear too much afterwards, but he had to go around and do the rounds, you know what I'm saying? Like, and go on the Skip Bayless shows and all that, the Cold Pizzas and all them shows, right? And defend himself when he didn't have to. You know what I'm saying? He made a great play. He was a good player on a really great defensive team that just won the Super Bowl, and he has to defend himself over an interview. So I think it was a bit much, but he brought it upon himself, But he was a guy that can handle it, and I think he handled it pretty well.
Well, I do think this made him, 3 careers. I don't think Michael Crabtree is talked about without this.
Nope.
And I do think Aaron Andrews. Yep. I still think the thing you'll think about for Aaron, at least so far, is this interview. I think Aaron Andrews, you'll go to this interview and her flustered reaction to everything. So I think
she was taken.
She was shook.
She was shook. Like, what is going on here? But because he wasn't just talking, he was yelling. You know what I'm saying?
He was fired up.
He was fired up, and she was just like, you can see the face, like, oh, okay, I got to keep the mic here, And then he just walks off on her. She's thinking she's getting a 5-minute interview. That ain't happening. He walked right off on her, and she was there stuck, not knowing what else to say. But it made a couple careers. It ended Crabtree's career, I thought too, like, because he was a solid player. He was, wasn't a bust, but he when he came out of Texas Tech, he was going to be this great wide receiver, and that didn't pan out. And I think Richard Sherman just ended that career right there in that moment.
Do you think without the post-game stuff, and say everything else is the same, there's a colorful personality, how much of this play is talked about if we don't have the post-game? Like years
that
like
play? Oh no, without nothing. I don't even think it's talked about. Like honestly, like it was a great play on Sherman's part, but I think the interview escalates the play times 10.
And I'm glad you said that. Thank you for that. That if I was a lawyer, case closed. Like the biggest play of his career, and it was a great play, but we don't talk about it if he doesn't have that interview. Like that's all I'll say. We not mentioned it.
I appreciate you setting me up like that.
I had to. It was right there. So I just wanted to let that out for people. It's infamous post-game stuff. It was a great play, but we're not talking about that play at all. Nearly 9 years later, if he doesn't have everything else afterwards. So thank you, Jose.
So if you're listening on the podcast, this dude's got the biggest smile in the world right now. But that's all good. He set me up. We'll leave it at that.
No, so this was so much fun to look at this rivalry, and the thing is, it really, like you said, was a real 3-year run because like 2014, they're still talking about it, but the Niners are done, but it's one that I hope gets talked about the way like it's not as great as like the Niners Cowboys of the 90s.
No.
Or Steelers Raiders of the 70s and stuff like that. But it's a special one.
It needed a couple more years. You know what I'm saying? Like if this goes into like 2017 and they're still beating the shit out of each other and they're playing in meaningful playoff games, right? I think then we got something. But the greatness of it was so short and it was just like it left so much meat on the bone. But again, like a lot of these injuries started to come into play and a lot of off the field stuff started happening and it just, they couldn't get over that. But no, I agree. It doesn't match out there, but I would give it like, I would match it up with like Packers Cowboys in the 90s. You know what I'm saying? Like, And even though the Cowboys beat the shit out of the Packers for those years, it was still, they were playing often and in meaningful games. I would go with like rivals like that.
Gotcha. I agree. And I think for me, the last thing I feel we want to say is I'm a guy who believes in building through the draft. I think it's important. I think it's like the preferred best way. But if I'm honest, people can give a devil's advocate by looking at these Niners because you never know when that window is closing. After this game, like we've said, you would have thought that Niners were going to be there. It winds up being until that Super Bowl in 2019, right before, that season, right before COVID hit.
Yeah.
That was their first time in the playoffs since this game. The Niners franchise goes down. So some people say when you're there, you go all out and you make these moves to win it now, like the LA Rams did last year, because you never know when you're going to be back there. So there's, pluses and minuses to both sides, but these early 2010 Niners are a reminder of that. We would have thought all these guys would have been there for the rest of the decade. And after this game, the franchise wasn't the same for a while.
Yeah, and I know we're wrapping up, but I think it's two things, right? I think Harbaugh leaves hurts Kaepernick, right? Which, Kaepernick hurting the team, and not hurting the team, but like his play not elevating is a part of that. And I just think what happens to Bowman, Willis, and Alden Smith is the biggest part of it, to be honest with you. Like those 3 careers ending in the next couple of seasons, you know what I'm saying? Like, and they just didn't recover from that, which I understand because again, like the Bowman thing was like a nasty injury. Patrick Willis retiring, let's be honest, was a shock. He was in the prime of his career, the top of his game, and then I respect it though, 100%. And then nobody saw Alden Smith happening with all those off the field issues and stuff, and
for sure.
It was sad to see it end like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, and then we all know, with Kaepernick, what happened with Kaepernick, with Eric Reed, like all those guys in that situation. It was an ugly ending to a team that could have been. I mean, they had a great run, right? But it could have been an even better run. and it just didn't happen. But on the flip side, the Seahawks kept it together for a bunch of years, and they had a great run. And they're still, again, in the mix. And what they did, they just put the Seahawks in that conversation with Steelers and Cowboys and New England, where it's like they're one of those prominent NFL franchises that dudes want to go play for.
Yeah. I know we're going long, but hey, people, this is our first time recording in 2023, so bear with us. But, Jose, the points you're making, it makes me think, because what happened with Seattle the following year and the Malcolm Butler interception, and that really sent them – they had a few more playoff years, but that really was the end of that dynastic run, honestly, in a way, was that Butler interception.
I mean, because in 2014, these two teams played on Thanksgiving, so the league was all about this.
Right.
These two teams, you know what I'm saying?
Right. Right. So it just comes down to it where, you got to respect dynasties because, like, how easy it is something to go wrong where you think, oh, even if you won one and it looks like you're going to go back, but things can change so fast. So it's so hard to repeat or to win multiple in a span. So we got to give it credit. But just like so many other things, I think about like The Last Dance and the ending of it and people saying, oh, we could have gone for 7 and how badly it ends. These things, they don't really end smooth. They all end bad, even for these great teams. And you see the Niners, they didn't get that ultimate, like being a great team but it ended badly for them. And even for Seattle, it's a shame how badly it ended for them. And I do hope when they're all done, retired, if they can kind of come back and kind of mend some fences,
Yeah, I think if Seattle wins that second one, this is an all-time great defense, right? Like, it's already close to an all-time great defense, but now you're talking like back-to-back Super Bowls, domination for a couple seasons there. Like, it's just so many legacies shifted. And I know Deremy, but as listeners know, it's bigger than the game with Deremy and Jose. We're all about legacies and was those couple plays here and there that shift the whole dynamic of the NFL. And that 2014 season, that interception, the Malcolm Butler interception, like, just shifted so much in how we look at this Seattle team. But again, like, I agree. Like, if they win that one and then it finishes kind of rough, they got back-to-back. A lot of teams are not getting back-to-back Super Bowls. If they do that, it's different. They didn't do that, and the way it ended, it was just a bad look. And not only the way it ended, but it was like defense versus Russell Wilson. Defense talking about Pete Carroll was favoring Russell Wilson. That's why they didn't run the ball on the 1-yard line. Like, it was just not – it ended really, really bad. And to the point where they let all these defensive players go and just built around Russ so that would make him happy. And it was just –
I mean, Earl Thomas getting hurt and giving the finger.
Giving the finger to the sideline.
Yeah.
His own sideline,
Yeah, saying it to the Seahawks management and stuff. Like, it ended badly for these guys. It really did.
Right.
And
right.
that's a
Cam
shame.
Chancellor, the injury to Cam Chancellor, like, like that just – it was just one after one after one after one. And I guess, they're bouncing back now. They had a couple great drafts, and now they're like, in the playoffs again, and they're going to be a team that's going to get better. But yeah, for both of these franchises, it was just really abrupt endings to, again, two really, really, really good teams that were so much fun to watch in this era.
And I hope they mend it, and I hope we get, if there's a team who I would love to see like a 30 for 30 on, or like a Last Dance type, the Legion of Boom would be awesome to see. And I would love to see that one. And I also, it's really something, I think, in any sport, when you win one and you're remembered. We usually remember teams who win multiple.
Yeah.
But the 85 Bears won one, but they're remembered. And I think the Legion of Boom only winning one, but they're going to be talked about forever. And that shows you how special this team was, this time, this defense was. So I really hope, like, they did something that was really special. I hope they can come together and acknowledge what they did.
Right.
And really and get their roses. You know what I'm saying?
But I'm not holding my breath. That's going to be
There have been some ugly things. But I'll say this: you've heard us talk about the '90s Cowboy. If Jimmy and Jerry can kind of do all right, there's hope for anybody. I say.
Very true. Very true. So hopefully that happens. I would love to see that again because they were some great players. But yeah, Deremy, man, I'm glad we did this episode because one, it was great to be back with you as always, man, and this was fun. This was fun football to watch, and this was a fun episode to do with you, man.
Absolutely. So, we're going to get 2023 started off big. So we're going to be giving you some extra content coming. We're excited to do it like we do, and no one does it better than us. So
That's right.
For the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Jose Ruiz, I'm Deremy Dove. Thank you guys for listening to Bigger Than the Game with Deremy and Jose.
Peace.